Hello, hello.
Hello, Kimberly.
I can't stop laughing. Eric's being so goofy.
Oh, what is he doing now?
Oh, we just got done talking about happiness, and when he said, "I'll be your source of happy," then he started talking about playing pranks and making people laugh in really raunchy ways.
Oh, of course. Keep it up. Keep up the good work. Do those raunchy pranks. People love them.
Whatever I can do to make y'all smile, he says.
Okay. You're so sweet. Well, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we talk about, uh, us human beings, we like to control things. But I want to talk about the difference in the pros and cons of guiding rather than controlling. How to, not be a control freak and how to learn how to manage things without controlling them. What do you think?
He goes, he's like, "Ooh, you and your lists, Mom." He's like, "I like
I've
this
got my
one."
list. I've got lists of lists. Are you kidding me? I'm a list maker. I have my to-do
Oh,
list on an index card, and I also have it on my iPhone, my iCal. So I just love
oh, that's
scratching out
funny.
things on a list. Though it feels so good. Okay, and I scratched out off cat litter, cleaned that, did my plans, took out the trash. Yep. So I made
Nice.
headway.
Making progress.
Yes. All right. Back to the important
Okay,
stuff.
he says control versus guiding. How do you keep them separate? How do you control someone without guiding them?
And if you want to talk
He
about why
says,
why humans want to control all the time to start out with, that's fine. Otherwise, it's go on with your bad self.
he says, he goes, he's like busting a move, like moonwalking. He's like, I am bad. He says, well, let's start with control. Why do people need to control or feel like they're controlling situations? Um, a lot of that, this is nothing new. He says a lot of that comes from ego and feeling, he says for a lot of people, feeling control is, he's going like this. He goes, it's a false sense of security. People need
Yeah.
to feel secure in certain situations and with certain people and relationships. Even as parents, we control our kids instead of teach them.
Mm-hmm.
He says it's that sense of security that controlling can provide people, but it's a false sense of security.
Mm.
So oftentimes people get. He goes, well, then too, you have mental illness can play a role in that too.
Yeah.
Um,
Like OCD
and then he,
and
yep,
anxiety.
that's exactly what he was just getting ready to say. He said you have people with OCD that they're very tedious about. Okay, he's going to use my husband as an example,
Oh, he
and
could use me as an example on this one, but okay.
he's he's very OCD. He likes things to be just so, and I he never used to be that way. I think it was the military and what that
Oh yeah,
instilled in him. And Eric's like, duh.
yeah.
But to them, it's all that goes way back. We won't open that can of worms about the military and all that. But he says the OCD is derived from ego, controlling, and feeling the need to have things in order and just so and inside this framework. Because if it's inside this framework, then I have control, and then I feel secure when it's inside this framework. Um, he says that's partially a personality trait. Then you have opposite personalities that they don't care. Things are just go with the flow, and that's me. I'm one of those people. Like
I wish I
I,
was more
I
like
could
that.
I couldn't be OCD if I tried. I kind of wish I was sometimes, but um, so he says the control is is a need to just that control people, control circumstances, so that you know what outcomes are ahead. And again, that's because of ego needing that sense of security. So when when trying to guide instead of control, because you can still be OCD and not be controlling. He
Oh
says,
well,
when
why well, wait, why is it a false security? Because I feel like it is a security for me to like control my day with to-do lists and all that stuff.
he says he says it is, again, it's tangible things that you think you need, whether it's marking things off on a list or doing things on your list step by step. I got
Hmm.
this done. I feel fulfilled. And I feel in control. Um, he says it's a personality trait. It's when the mind needs to relate to situations, events. He says to when the mind needs to relate to those based on like what you've written out, then you go through step by step in your mind and you get these different steps done. It's still he goes, hear me for these words. He says this is a still circumstantial thing, placing your fulfillment on. He says because then what happens if you don't get your list done? What if you don't get through your list? Then you're not happy, but or upset or
Unsettled.
anxiety kicks
Yeah.
in. He says um, this is again where people place their fulfillment or their contentment in having that control. Um, he says this can be a really vicious cycle because if you, for some reason, feel out of control, it can trigger like anxiety attacks for some people. And it can trigger people. He says sometimes what happens a lot of times is people with OCD, if they don't achieve what's on their list or, go about their day in a certain way, they actually internalize awful thoughts about themselves, like destructive thoughts, like, well, I failed today, or
Yeah. I'm
um,
not
I,
productive.
yeah, I suck because I didn't get that done, he
Yeah.
says. So being up against that sometimes can be very unfair to
Mm.
yourself. Um, and that, he says, anyhow, that contentment that comes from that is all, again all about the need for control that derives from it, and the need for control in situations, even relationships, comes from needing the security in that control.
Hmm.
So let's say he goes, this is going to freak you out, Mom.
Oh boy.
He goes, let's
Prepare to be
say
freaked.
you take a couple days and you don't make any lists. You just go about your day however it
Seriously, I
comes to
got
you.
butterflies in my stomach when you said that. That's how bad it is.
Oh, he says, he's trying to introduce this thought to you very gently, like he's
Oh,
walking
go
on
for it.
eggshells.
It's okay. Don't worry
He
about it.
goes, he goes, perhaps you might be more aware, more mindful of the whole world around you outside of that list, outside of your plan or your
Mm.
framework. He says sometimes people can get so focused on their
Controlling.
plan and
Yeah.
controlling things that they forget to experience the rest of the world
Mm.
around them. So, and again, he says love accepts what is and accepts it as it comes. Love more so surrenders to the world around you and allows you to be one with everything, whereas ego needs control, ego needs um, understanding, ego needs all those things that give that sense of control. So how do we? He goes. So how do we guide without controlling? Um, he says just by sharing. He says it's not rocket science. He says sharing your experiences, sharing your love with somebody else, um, sharing friendship and relationship, ideas and thoughts. He says, but the moment when you need an outcome to be a certain way based on what you shared, he goes, that's when you're stepping into the waters of controlling.
Yeah.
Um, he says it doesn't mean, for everybody listening, it doesn't mean that you OCD people aren't loving. He goes, that's not true. Um, he goes, there's so many people that are OCD about loving, that make sure that
Oh
they do
no.
things that show their love.
That
So
well,
he
that's
goes,
kind of like me too.
so he says, in all honesty, he goes, when you take a big step back and you look at the big picture, when you need to control anything, you're not accepting and love the world around you.
Mm.
You're not going to get a clear picture of the world around you because it's like you have tunnel vision on
Yeah.
controlling whatever it is. Um, so I asked him a question. I said, well, for example, my husband is, he's a soldier. He guides about 60 to 80 men. So how does
Mm.
he guide them without controlling them or, needing to
Yeah.
feel like he has to
I
control
was going
them
to ask you
because,
to give an example with children, but this is just as good. Yeah.
yeah, because he often says, man, it's like chasing around toddlers because, none of them listen and I got to get control. And so let me see what he says. Erik says that's like, I don't know what that means. That's like chasing a windmill. He says that when you chase something, whether it's, trying to get control of children or a bunch of people together,
Herding
adults.
cats. Herding
Um,
cats.
yeah, there you go. He says it's going to be like an endless battle because you're not supposed to control. So it's going to constantly be a fleeting sense for you. If you think I got to control this group of men, it's constantly going to be fleeting because you're not supposed to control really ever. You can guide, you can teach, and the most important or the best way, he says, is to lead by example. He says there's going to be a few stray cats that you're just going to have to let them be stray. He says um, there's a few that people, children, what have you, that need to experience this incarnation for what it is for them without preconceived notions, without anybody guiding them, just basically like throwing themselves out there. Erik says, balls to the wall, gonna experience this life. But for the most part, people, animals, children can be guided, he says, and it's all about your actions.
Well,
Um,
let me give you an example. Say you have a kid that just doesn't do their homework, or maybe they just their room is a mess and they never, and you just don't know. You don't want them to fail third grade, but so instead of controlling them and you know making them sit down and do the work and blah blah blah. I mean, what can you do instead? What does guidance look like in that picture?
Guidance, he says, guidance looks like um, getting to the core of why the child's procrastinating or why the child is neglectful, whether it's chores, and chores, again, don't have to be controlling. Um, Repetition is important. Repeating and routine for
Mm-hmm.
children is important. But sometimes people get caught up in controlling them and the way they enforce it. He says, so
Ah,
take a deeper look at why is the child neglectful on their homework? Why do they not care?
maybe they're
When you look at
struggling
what
with the subject or a
he says,
school.
when you look at what they're going through emotionally, that's going to tell you why they're neglectful. He says, a lot of times um, kids will be neglectful when it comes to homework because they've internalized experiences. So let's say they took a test and they didn't do so good. Well, now they internalize that result and think, well, I suck, I'm stupid, I'm not smart,
Yeah.
and I just don't care anymore.
Mm.
Um, that he goes, believe it or not, even in little ones, that comes from ego because
Sure.
ego. He's talking about how ego doesn't like failure or
Mm.
feeling like failure,
Mm-mm.
so it wants to toss it aside. And um, so whether it, and then when children neglect their chores, why is that? Why do they neglect? What is that emotional cause for it? He says, so if you sit down and ask them, how come you're having such a hard time? You know that you have to do this every day. Why is it so hard for you? Um, but unfortunately, he goes, the world we live in, it's hard to take that time to connect. Again, whether it's with children, whether it's with coworkers,
Mm.
being a manager at work. And he says, actually just taking the time to get to the root of the problem instead of tossing out um,
Orders or
or
whatever.
orders
Mm.
out of control. He says, you'll be you'll make much more headway, you'll be much more successful when people just take a minute and say, hey, let's get to the root of the problem. He says, again, that's, people get tripped up because they want that control. So they say, well, you're not doing this until you finish your homework, or you're not doing that until you clean your room. So instead of barking out those orders, sit down and say, well, how come you're not cleaning your room? What's the problem? Well, I don't know how. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Okay, maybe there's a lack of communication. Let me reiterate to you, um, as a parent, what I hope for you to do to clean your room. Um, Picking up your laundry, picking up your mess, whatever it is. So he kind of smiled real big. He goes, you see what I'm getting at? Um, Communication is key in guidance.
That's true.
Guidance versus control. He says control doesn't take stop and take time for communication.
Mm.
Control just
It's more
is
about
nasty, he
action.
says.
Action, yeah. So logical consequences would be all right, right? Like when my kids didn't pick up their toys in their room, I would just take a big old black trash bag, put them all in there, and throw them in the attic. And then, where's my Lego set? Oh, well, when I was vacuuming, that's right, I stepped on it and hurt my foot, so I put it somewhere. I just can't remember where I put your toys, so I do
You
things
sound
like
like
that.
me.
I do things
Um,
like that.
he says consequences are good because it teaches children, even coworkers, again, doesn't have to just be limited to children, but it teaches people, um, no matter what you choose to do in life, there will be consequences. And then one thing leads to another, everything's connected. So how does that affect the bigger picture? So he goes, sometimes it's unreasonable to think when you're talking to a little second grader to talk about the bigger picture. But at
Yeah.
least if you enforce those consequences, then they're going to grow with that understanding
Mm.
and knowing because basically he's like, if you don't teach it to your kids, if you don't start young, how are they going to know? How are they
I
going to
know.
know that
Then the
you're
consequences will
responsible
be
for actions?
bigger. Will be bigger if they don't learn to. Yeah. Anything else before we close on guidance versus control?
He just made a comment about the children. He says the bigger they get, the bigger their problems get.
I
So start
know.
young.
Tell me about it. When y'all got to be
He says,
teenagers, all I could think was, why didn't I have 5 kittens instead? Mm.
he says, control versus guidance. He says, to help you step outside of wanting to control or needing to control, surrender to the world around you. Sometimes it might be uncomfortable for you,
Mm.
but perhaps you might go through certain experiences that you wouldn't have if you were in more of that controlling state. He says, be excited about the opportunities for you to experience the world around you when you do surrender that need for control.
So it opens up
He
the
says, you'll
world.
be a better leader.
So it
It
opens up the
opens
world.
up the world to you. He says, and you'll be a better guide for that reason.
Mm. Okay. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Kim. You guys
You're welcome. Thank you, Mama.
be sure to join us in our radio show every Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time. Go to my blog, and on the right side, you'll see the archived podcast for the latest episode, but also you'll see the button so that you can click on Listen Now. And you can ask
Yes.
Eric all sorts of questions. Bye,
Yep.
guys.
Bye.